from under the green turban. The dark face was blankly expressionless. He might have been gazing through my head. His eyes neither twinkled with fun nor sent a message of warning, but somehow I knew that he saw me, that he had been watching me for a long time. "You see the one I mean, don't you?" asked Monty. "Well, that's the one I want. I'll take him." She spoke as if she were selecting a horse at a horse show. Anthony had brought this on himself, but I was not angry with Anthony. I was angry with the girl for putting her finger into our pie. "That's not a dragoman," I assured her. "If he were, he'd come and bawl out his accomplishments as the others do. He's a very different sort of chap." "That's why I want him," said Monty, "and if he isn't a dragoman, he'll jump at being one if I offer to pay him enough. He's an Egyptian, anyhow, by his clothes, or a Bedouin or something, although he isn't as dark as the rest of these men. I suppose he must know a little about his own city and country." "It doesn't follow he'd tell travellers about them for money," said I. "He looks to me a man of good birth and distinction in old-fashioned dress. Why he's lingering on the pavement in front of this hotel I can't explain, but I'm certain he isn't touting. Probably he's waiting for a friend." "He's the best-looking Arab we've yet seen," remarked Mrs. East. "Like my idea of an Egyptian gentleman." "Pooh!" said Monty. "Just test him, Lord Ernest." "I'm sorry, but I can't do it," I answered, with a firmness which ought to have been tried on her long ago. "And I wouldn't discuss him in such a loud tone of voice. He may understand English." "We have to yell to hear ourselves speak over all this row," Biddy apologized for her darling. But she need not have troubled herself. Miss Gilder had been deaf to my implied reproach. "I'm glad I'm an American girl," she said. "When I want things I want them so dreadfully I just go for them, and surprise them so much that I get them before they know where they are. Now I'm going for this dragoman." "He's not a I persisted, but she cut me short. "I bet you my hat that he will be one. What will you bet that he won't, Lord Ernest?" "I'll bet you his green turban," said I. "How can you get it?" "As easily as you can get him," I retorted. "It's a safe bet." Monty looked excited, but firm. Luckily, as she does it so often, it's becoming to her to look firm. I have noticed that it's not becoming to most girls. It squares their jaws and makes their eyes snap. But the spoiled daughter of the dead Cannon King at her worst merely looks pathetically earnest and Minerva-like. This, I suppose, is one of the little ways she has acquired since she gave up kicking and screaming people into submission. As Biddy says, the girl can be charming not only when she wants to be, but quite often when she doesn't. The man with the green turban was no longer engaged in hypnotizing. He had retired within himself, and appeared oblivious to the outer world. Yet nobody jostled the tall, straight figure which stood with folded arms, lightly leaning against a tree. The colour of his turban was sacred in the eyes of the crowd, and when Miss Gilder, leaning over the terrace railing, beckoned him, surprise rather than jealousy showed on the faces of the unwonted dragomans. As for the wearer of the turban, he did what I expected and wished him to do, paid not the slightest attention to the gesture. Whatever the motive for his masquerade, it was not to attract anything feminine. I smiled sardonically. "That's a nice hat you've got on, Miss Gilder," I remarked. "Do you collect girls' hats?" she asked sweetly. "But mine isn't eligible yet for your collection. Let me see, what did you say he was? Oh, a Haji." And she shrilled forth sweetly, her voice sounding young and clear. "Haji! Haji Effendi! Venez ici, s'il vous plaît. Please come here." I could have been knocked flat by a blow of the smallest, cheapest ostrich feather in the hands of any street merchants. For he came! Anthony came! Not to look meekly up from the pavement below the railing, but to ascend the steps of the terrace, and advance with grave dignity toward our table. Within a yard of us he stopped, giving to me, not to Miss Gilder, the beautiful Arab salute, a touch on the forehead and heart. "You devil!" I was saying to myself. "So you walk into this trap, do you, and calmly trust me to get you out? Serve you right if I don't move hand or foot." And I almost made up my mind that I wouldn't. But I was interested. I wanted intensely to know what the dickens Anthony was up to, and whether he would have been up to it if he'd known the sort of young woman he had to deal with. "It was I who called to you, not this gentleman," said Monty, when she found that Green Turban did not look at her. "Do you speak French or English a little?" "A little of both. But I choose French when talking to Americans," replied Anthony Fenton, with astounding impertinence, in the preferred language. "I do not know you, madam, but I do know this gentleman." Good heavens, what next? He acknowledged me. What was I to do now? What did the impudent fellow want me to do? Evidently he was trying an experiment. Antony is great on experiments, and always has been. But this was a bomb. I thought he wanted to see if I could catch it on the fly, and drop it into water before it had time to explode. "Why didn't you tell us, Lord Ernest?" asked Monty, with a flash in her grey eyes. "I thought you hadn't been in Egypt since you were a child." "I haven't, and I didn't recognize him at first," I answered, trying for the coolness which Anthony dared to count upon. "You remember me now?" he inquired politely. Yes," I replied, also in French. "Your face is familiar, though you've changed, I think, since the last you were in England. It must have been there. Yes, of course. You were on a diplomatic mission. But your name—" "You may have known me as Ahmed Atoun," said the wretch, not dreaming of the slip that he had made. Cleopatra, who has a little French, nevertheless started, and fixed upon the face under the turban a stare of feverish interest. Brigit and the unobtrusive lady with the slanting eyes both showed such symptoms of surprise as must too late have warned Fenton that he had missed his footing, skating on thin ice. "Antoun!" exclaimed Mrs. East. "Why, that's what you said you called your friend Captain Fenton." I glanced at Anthony. His profile had no more expression than that of an Indian on an American penny, and indeed rather resembled it. If he were blaming me for letting anything out, I had a right to blame him for letting himself in. He was silent as well as expressionless. He left it all to me, diplomat or duffer. "Antoun Effendi was the nickname my friend Fenton got at school," I explained to Cleopatra, "because it sounded a bit like his own name, and because he had associations with Egypt. He was proud of them and still is. But Antoun is a name often heard here. And every man who isn't a bey or a prince or a sheikh is an Effendi. I quite remember you now," I hurried on, turning to Anthony once more. "You are Hadji as well as Effendi." "I have the right to call myself so, if I choose," he admitted. "I am pleased to meet you again. I was waiting for a friend when you beckoned. If you did not recognize my face at first, may I ask what it was you wanted of me?" There was no limit, then, to his audacity. He had not learned his lesson yet, after all, it would seem. Monny could not bear tamely to lose her hat, although she must have felt her hatpins trembling in the balance. "I told you before," she repeated, "that it was I who beckoned you." He looked at her without speaking, and somehow the green turban and the long straight gown, by adding to his dignity, added also to his remote air of cold politeness. How could she go on? Had she the cheek to go on? She had, but the cheek was flushed with embarrassment. I'm anxious for a guide, someone who knows Egypt well and several languages," she desperately blurted out, looking like a half frightened, half defiant child. "I thought—" "There are plenty of dragomans, madam," Green Turban reminded her. "I can recommend you several." "I don't want a regular dragoman," she said, "and I'm not madam. I am Miss Gilder." "Indeed?" Chilling indifference in the tone. Monny's hat was practically mine. I thought I should rather value it. "Yes, but of course that can't matter to you." "No, it cannot, mademoiselle." "What I want to say is this. You're a Hadji, which means you've been to Mecca. Lord Ernest Burroughs just told us. So you must be very intelligent. Are you in business?" "I am interested in excavations." "Oh! And are you allowed to make them yourself?" "Not always." I glanced at him quickly, wondering if he meant that answer more for me than for the girl. But his face told nothing. "Would you be able to, if you were rich enough?" "It is possible." "Well, I'd be willing to give you a big salary for showing us about Cairo, and perhaps going up the Nile." "You do not know who I am, mademoiselle. Ask your friend Lord Ernest Borrow. Perhaps he may remember something about my circumstances, now he has recalled my face." I was honestly not sure whether this were further deviltry, or an appeal for help. In any case, I thought it time for the scene to end. "I told you," I said to Monny in English, "that he was a man of importance, not at all the sort of person you could expect to engage for a guide. You must see now that he's a gentleman, and an Egyptian gentleman is just the same as any other." "Surely not quite," she answered in the same language, and I realized my foolish mistake in using it, as if I meant her to understand that Antoun Effendi knew it too little to catch our secrets. "An Egyptian man can't have the same feelings as a European? Why, for hundreds and hundreds of years they've been an enslaved race, like our black people at home. We'd never think of calling